All right.
Game on.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for attending our kickoff open house for House Bill 1110. That is a bill that was passed back in 2023 last year by the state legislature. They call it the missing middle bill or the middle housing bill. What we're here to do today is to really explain what that bill means for the folks that live in Renton. We've got a great group of folks here. We have three city staff and two folks from Makers Architecture and Urban Design that are helping us implement HB 1110. We've set aside about an hour and a half today to go through the legislature, the bill from the legislature, and again, how it affects the city of Renton. We have some time for questions and answers. Again, I want to thank everybody for taking time out on a Saturday morning to come and visit with us today. If you have maybe a tea time in the next hour or so, or you need to take the kids to a soccer game, know that we're recording this. You can come back and review the rest of the material. And also, anytime you can reach out to city staff if you've got other questions that we weren't able to get to today, or maybe you were a little shy and you didn't want to ask during the open house. Just know that city staff is here to answer those questions. So I'm going to kick it off to the folks that are actually doing the real work here this morning. Katie Bucco-Morales is a senior planner with the City of Renton's long-range planning staff, and we have Angelia Weiss, associate planner with our long-range planning staff. And we also have Rachel Miller and Marcus Johnson from Makers Architecture and Urban Design. And we also, last but definitely not least, we have Margaret Bravo from our planning division staff helping us out here with all the tech matters. So without further ado, I believe I'm kicking it off to city staff first. Is that right, Katie?
Yes, thanks, Matt. And Marcus, have you already gone ahead and shared your screen?
I'll share my screen right now.
Yep.
Oh, thanks, Rachel.
Yep.
All right.
Okay, are you all see?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Again, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This is our first big citywide kickoff event, and it's great to see so many people here, especially on a Saturday morning. Next slide, please. We've already ran through introductions, and so I think we'll just pop into virtual meeting instructions. Angelia, I think it's you.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Matt, for the introductions. And thank you all for joining our HB 1110 Middle Housing Online Open House. Just to help facilitate this meeting in the most efficient way possible and ensure there's no audio interference, we have the following open house virtual meeting instructions. So number one, if you can please mute your microphone when not speaking, that will be very helpful to ensure everyone can clearly hear the presenter or speaker. Two, if you can use the chat function to ask questions or raise your virtual hand to indicate you wish to speak, that would be very helpful. Our planning director, Matt Herrera, will be on deck to respond to questions as they come in, but we also have a designated Q&A time at the very end of our presentation. And lastly, please note that this is a recorded public hearing and the chat box is also part of the public record. Next slide. So for some background, in March of last year, the Washington State Department of Commerce released a statewide housing needs report that stated by 2044, Washington will need more than 1 million additional units to accommodate projected population growth. To address the anticipated lack of housing choices and affordability, the Washington State Legislature passed HB 1110 in April of 2023 in order to promote the development of middle housing. Middle housing is defined by HB 1110 as those housing types between single-family residences and mid-rise multifamily development. This includes duplexes to sixplexes, townhouses, stacked flats, courtyard apartments, and cottage housing.
Thanks, Angelia. Single-family residential development will continue to be allowed, but in order to comply with HB 1110, cities are required to allow at least 6 out of the 9 middle housing types on all lots that are predominantly zoned for residential use. Basically, this allows multifamily housing types within residential zones where they've not historically been allowed. So I'll just pause here to note that this map and for Renton highlights where middle housing types are required to be allowed. So those areas that have not been grayed out are the zones where middle housing will be seeing middle housing. Next slide.
All right, so this slide on the screen provides a zoning map of the city. The black line indicates the city boundary and the zones are color-coded and labeled for visibility. For those in the audience who are unfamiliar with the term zone or zoning, the city defines a zone as a portion of the city to which a uniform set of regulations applies controlling types and intensities of land uses. So for example, cities including Renton typically have different zones for commercial uses and different zones for residential uses. You'll see some of our residential uses are circled in black on the left-hand side there. Zones serve an important purpose of ensuring our communities do not have or perpetuate incompatible uses next to each other. So for example, an industrial use right next to a residential use would be considered an incompatible use. As indicated by Katie, there are several residential zones that HB 1110 will affect. These residential zones include our current single family zones, such as the R4, R6, and R8 zones, as well as our current multifamily zones, such as the R10 and R14 zones. And you can see those range in colors in that color coding from the green to the kind of peachy color, the R14 zone there. Next slide.
In compliance with state legislation, Commerce prepared model ordinances to help cities in implementing the new legislative requirements. Makers Architecture and Urban Design was the consulting firm that was selected to lead that work and to support the Department of Commerce. And we have also selected Makers to support Renton in developing our local middle housing ordinance. Really just given their knowledge and familiarity with the legislation, they really are the subject matter experts in helping us comply with state requirements. And we are still in the early stages of planning and working towards compliance. The planning process includes public and stakeholder engagement to inform the draft ordinance. And so we've launched a project webpage. We've also attended community events earlier this spring, just to let folks know that HB 1110 exists and what its implications are. And we're hosting 2 public engagement workshops. Today is the first of those workshops, and then we'll schedule another follow-up discussion. But our deadline for compliance is June 30th, 2025, and we are required to demonstrate how we comply with HB 1110. For cities that have not passed the required development regulations by that June 30th deadline of next year, the state-approved model ordinance will preempt and supersede local development regulations until we have an adopted ordinance.
So one question you might have is, how do the requirements of HB 1110 apply to cities across the state? So to summarize, these requirements generally apply based on the size of the jurisdiction. There are 77 cities across the state that are subject to HB 1110. And of those 77 cities, 55 are in the 4-county central Puget Sound region, including King County, Snohomish, Pierce, and Kitsap counties. The 77 cities subject to HB 1110 range in size from Beau Arts Village with a population of 317 to Seattle with a population of 737,015. HB 1110 establishes 3 categories of cities based on population and location with different requirements for each category. These categories include Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 cities. Tier 1 includes 16 jurisdictions with a population over 75,000. Tier 2 has 27 jurisdictions, which ranges from 25,000 to 75,000. And then lastly, Tier 3 includes 34 jurisdictions with a population less than 25,000 and contiguous with the urban growth area that contains the county's largest cities in counties exceeding a population of 275,000. For Renton, which is a Tier 1 jurisdiction, the first deadline for adoption will be June 30th, 2025. Next slide.
So as Angelia mentioned, cities are categorized into tiers 1, 2, and 3, which are based on population. As a city with well over 75,000, we are a Tier 1 city. As required by HB 1110, once the new legislation goes into effect, we will be required to allow up to 4 units per lot. Also, lots that are within a quarter-mile walking distance of a major transit stop are allowed an additional 2 units, allowing up to 6 units per lot. There is also the opportunity for a unit increase of up to 6 units if at least 2 of those units are affordable, regardless of their proximity to major transit stop. The definition of major transit stop is provided here below. It refers to light rail, commuter rail, streetcar, bus rapid transit, and other transit that's funded or expanded under RCW 81104. And this would include Sound Transit buses in King County Metro. And for lots that are, as I mentioned, not within the 1/4 mile walking distance to a major transit stop, they are also allowed the additional of 2 units, bringing up to 6 units per lot. If the property owner commits to renting or selling them, those bonus units as affordable. And it has to be recorded as a covenant or deed restriction to make sure that they do remain affordable, even if there is a change of ownership. Next slide, please.
So as part of HB 1110, there are restrictions for how much on-site parking can be required by cities. For example, HB 1110 precludes cities from requiring off-street parking as a condition of middle housing approval when located within a half-mile walking distance of a major transit stop. Some of the major transit stop routes include King County Rapid Ride F line, future Sound Transit Stride line, future King County Rapid Ride 1 line. And these lines are shown in the gold layer on the right photo. So you can see how they run across, up and down across the city on that right photo side there. The photo on the left shows the transit routes overlaid with the residential areas. The color has changed, so you'll see that instead of being shown in gold, it's kind of shown in a gray hue on that left photo. And then you can see where it overlays some of those residential zones. And the residential zones are shown in the peachy and orange and red hues. So one thing to note is even though that the major transit line layer covers quite a bit of area, you should note that only where that layer overlays those residential areas, it's those residential lots that will be impacted there as far as what we can require for parking. So hopefully that makes sense as shown in that photograph. Due to the proximity of major transit routes, several parts of the city center, Kennydale, Tabet, and Benson Hill community planning areas will have no minimum parking standards for middle housing or for accessory dwelling units, also known as mother-in-law units. However, one thing to emphasize is that while the city cannot include requirements to provide on-site parking spaces for middle housing in these areas, the city can include code incentives or perks that encourage developers to include parking as an option. Next slide.
So in addition to the parking standards that Angelia just listed, which are all based on proximity to a major transit stop, outside of that 1/2 mile threshold, HB 1110 also includes parking requirements, and these are based on lot size. So for lots that are smaller than 6,000 square feet, a maximum of 1 off-street parking space per unit may be required. And for lots that are greater than 6,000 square feet, up to 2 off-street parking spaces may be required. This is a pretty notable deviation from our current residential parking standards, which requires 2 parking spaces for detached single-family units and townhomes. Parking requirements for attached dwellings in our higher density residential zones is determined per unit by the number of bedrooms. Also keep in mind that we are just talking about predominantly residential zones. Next slide.
So some areas or properties within the city will be exempt from HB 1110 requirements. For example, HB 1110 requirements do not apply to lots that are encumbered by critical areas, lots with a watershed or a reservoir for potable water, or if it was listed as impaired or threatened pursuant to the Clean Water Act. Lots that have been designated as urban separators by countywide planning policies. Also, areas that are currently only served by on-site sewage systems may be limited to only 2 units per lot until sewer service is expanded. And then the exemption includes lots served by private wells or private water systems with less than 50 connections. And if city or water utility providers determine that certain lots would not have adequate water supply or available connections, those lots would not be eligible for additional use units. Also, the city is not required to issue building permits if any federal, state, or local requirements are not met. The legislation indicates that the city will eventually need to update the capital facilities plans to accommodate the increased housing. However, the city is not required to do so until the comprehensive plan update, which is in the year 2034, the next one following this current comprehensive plan update.
All right, so from here on, we'll just go ahead and pass it over to makers for these following discussion topics. We're going to go over the benefits of middle housing, Renton current housing supply, middle housing typology, compliance updates, and then provide some examples of what middle housing might look like on different lot sizes, middle housing photos and rendering examples that they've put together for us today, and then we'll have a polling, and then we'll close it out with a Q&A.
All right, thanks, Katie and Angelia. So just to start with, there's a lot of benefits that middle housing will bring to neighborhoods and housing in general. So affordability, middle housing in general can be more affordable per unit than new detached housing. And this is because multiple units share the land cost. And so the affordability and kind of this connects to a lower point on the list of the home ownership. It also creates more opportunities for home ownership at more attainable price points, just because people can get in and especially not have to do both condo versus and all the different type of stuff and work in to get home ownership options. Variety brings in a different collection of housing types and typologies. So we talked about a full list that we'll get again. So duplexes and townhomes and all of that different type of stuff. And so it creates different housing options with different sizes and different arrangements, which meet the needs for different groups of people. And then sustainability, attached homes use less energy for heating and cooling than detached homes. And then also the benefits that density brings. And so as higher density areas, they facilitate more walking, more biking, more transit use, which also reduce the amount of carbon emissions that are used generally by our normal transportation patterns and energy patterns. And equity, as I mentioned before, this just creates both a variety of housing options, opportunities for home ownership, and this is all to elevate equity and kind of provide lower income households, multi-generational families, and just different vulnerable populations that maybe have not had access to certain neighborhoods to be able to access those neighborhoods and live in them and have access to the amenities that those neighborhoods bring. Next slide. And to do a small kind of zoom out of why this is important. So the city of Renton, well, actually, let me start. So Puget Sound region has a population growth projection. So population is going to be increasing. And as we said before, the state of Washington has 1.1 million housing units that it needs to meet, increase or have in the next 20 years. And so the Puget Sound region has a significant portion of that housing collection as well, of around 830,000 housing units. And with 1.6 million people and 1.2 million more jobs coming to this region, there's got to be a lot of continued growth in the area. And so how that fits for Renton and what that means for Renton is that Renton will also have to incorporate and we'll see growth in both population and housing units and more jobs in the coming years over the next 20 years. So right now, the city of Renton's current zoning has the capacity to add about 16,500 new households. And based off of the state projections and the Puget Sound region projections, the city of Renton will be looking to have the capacity for 17,000 new households. So there will be some changes. That's part of the comp plan to increase the capacity to make sure that the city has the ability to have the housing and jobs. Thank you. And then, yeah, so this is just a big chart. You can kind of refer back to it later as a recording. There's a lot of numbers here, but it's essentially this middle column. You'll see additional housing units needed by 2044. There's the total units around 17,000. And then it breaks down by area median income, which is what AMI stands for, and just kind of the income bands of making sure there's housing that meets the needs of people in all of these different bands. So it's not just housing that's at the high end, it's not just housing that's at the low end, but you're also capturing housing across all of the things and in the middle bands as well. And as you can see, middle housing, as what we're focused on for this presentation, will help meet moderate income households. So the households earning between 80 and 100% of AMI is really where you're going to see a lot of the middle housing being able to serve those households. Okay, so housing typologies, as mentioned before, as part of HB 1110, Renton zoning codes must allow at least 6 of 9 listed types of middle housing that were in the bill. The 9 types are right here. So you have duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, fiveplexes, sixplexes, and then townhomes, stat flats, courtyard apartments, and cottage housing. And in the later slides, we'll be able to run through some examples of what these look like, some images, and then some renderings as well. And some already known necessary zoning code updates to make sure that the city of Renton is compliant with HB 1110. So some of those things, as just previously mentioned, is a summary of everything that's been said so far. Permitting 6 middle housing types in all residential zones, updating the definitions in the code to appropriately incorporate the allowed middle housing types, so actually giving definitions that make sense for those 6 allowed types, and then updating the maximum number of dwellings per lot from 1 dwelling and 1 ADU to 4 dwelling units in the future.
Okay. Hopefully we'll see you all when we get to the Q&A portion, but I'm Rachel Miller, also like Marcus with Makers Architecture and Urban Design, and happy to be here today. We've worked with you all a number of times on other community plans, including Benson Hill and City Center, Streetscapes, and Rainier Grady. So glad to be talking with you now about residential zones throughout the whole city, so broad brush across the city. We in Renton are really looking at 2 common lot sizes, small lots and mid-sized lots. And you do have lots on the broader ranges than that, but those are the ones that are pretty common. And so we're trying to understand what kinds of buildings and in what configurations they might fit in Renton. So again, it's looking at the whole citywide, but some of the more typical scenarios. So some of the cases that you all do have are small lots, and you have them both with alleys and without alleys. And so these lots here are about 5,000 square feet. So they're about 50 feet wide by about 100 feet deep. And so the first series of images that we'll go through, giving you just some of a flavor of what middle housing might look like. That's what we'll do right now. So the first thing that you might see, or that is allowed, or would be allowed, is that you might take existing homes and start modifying them so that they can have more units in them. So you might be able to break up a house into 2 units, or maybe there's a little basement unit that you get to from the side. Or you might take old garages and convert them to another unit. And here's one of those examples where you go down a path and find a unit from another portion of the home. You might, and this is already allowed in Renton, add accessory dwelling units in the rear yard. If they're up against an alley, maybe they're above parking, where you would normally have your garages already there. And then you might just have buildings that are designed in as duplexes or some of the other types that we'll show in a minute. They might actually be new individual homes. So this example shows 3 homes on a lot. So again, this is one of your typical lot sizes, this 50 by 100 feet. So there's several configurations that fit more units. These 2 show 4plexes in the front and ADUs or duplexes towards the rear. And so what those 4plexes might look like are something like this, or another type of example here with the ADUs in the backyard. And there are more configurations. This one is showing an example of how you might put parking up front. And another example of a duplex. You could imagine this also with units above, and maybe it's a 4plex. Like this one, also is a duplex and has some parking up front. And another type, this is actually a multiplex, so 1, 2, 3, 4 doors. On this building. And then this one, it's kind of hidden, but we think it's a triplex. So 1, 2, and then a 3rd door down here. And actually there might be another one on the other side. So probably a quadruplex. So here's another type of configuration. Again, a small lot, so 50 by 100, but looking more at a townhouse style and trying to get 1 stall per unit. So this would be, again, because these are under 6,000 square foot lots, Renton would not be allowed to require more than 1 per unit, although developers are always allowed to add more. So there are a variety of ways that the parking could be configured with the units, behind the units, alongside the units. And this one is a corner lot where there could be units facing 2 streets. So just some townhouse examples, more examples. I believe this one is in Renton. And this one as well. This one has the parking running up the side. So this side facing the street. Moving on to mid-size lots. So these are a little larger. These are about 7,500 square feet. And in Renton, they tend to not have alleys. There may be some though with alleys. So a variety of arrangements here. And these are showing examples where up to 6 units might be allowed. So in the cases where they're providing affordable housing, up to 6 units. So courtyard apartments, cottage housing configurations could work on these larger lots. These kinds of configurations are harder to fit on those small 5,000 square foot lots. And some examples of courtyard apartments, a variety of styles, these cottage housing. And you can do cottage housing with duplexes or triplexes still with a sort of cottage housing configuration. Here's an example of where the places where you would be allowed to require 2 stalls per unit. So that starts to take up a lot of space on the lot for parking. But that's the kind of thing that can happen. This is a larger lot, so a 60 foot by 125 foot lot. And one thing we wanted to note that in the example of the site plan, we showed the parking in the rear. There are some older styles where people used to put parking up front, and Renton's code currently does not allow that kind of. So this example is a multiplex, but putting the parking up front would not be allowed in Renton under current code. Okay, and so Renton has another type. This is also in the mid-size range, usually around 7,500 square feet per lot. But these are the curvilinear or odd-shaped lots, and we get these triangular shapes, especially around the cul-de-sacs. And so we wanted to show an example of what could fit in those kinds of configurations. So this example is something like one of these odd-shaped lots over here on the cul-de-sac. And you can actually fit some units in them. And so you can have a driveway running up the back and fitting different buildings around it. You could also fit a larger building in the front and parking in the back. And these all do meet 2 stalls per unit as well. So those were just some examples to get your brains thinking about what might be allowed and what the types of options are. And again, across all the residential zones. I'll hand it over to Marcus now to hear from you all.
Yeah, so we're going to do some poll questions just to hear from you and get some of your thoughts and quick feel on what we've presented so far and what you're thinking about. And so we're going to, the poll question, we're going to use poll everywhere. There is a link. Yes, thank you, Angelia. That's going to be in the chat for you to be able to easily click and join online here. If you're using your computer or laptop, if you want to use your phone, you can use the QR code over there on the right to scan the QR code, and it'll take you to the poll everywhere page that we'll be using. And we'll have poll questions on your phone or browser, and it'll advance with the slideshow. So you'll only be able to answer the question that's on the slide at that time. And we'll give some waiting period type of thing. We try not to go too fast, but we'll also want to make our way through it. And then if you ever need to change your response, there should be an icon that looks like a trash can with like a reverse symbol example there on that bottom right area. And so you'll just click that if you need to change your response and click on something else. Okay, and it seems like people might have figured out how to get to, if you needed the QR code, there's a small QR code at the top right of your screen on each of the questions. And I guess let us know if you're having trouble getting to the poll question, if you want to do the poll question, but there should be a link also in the chat as well.
And we have 13 attendees, and I'm seeing 8 responses. I know some people opt to not participate in these, and so that's fine. Whatever we see on this first one, we'll try to make sure we get about that number on the following ones.
Oh, hold on. Let me.
Yeah. Marcus, are you getting the link into the chat that goes to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, you're already doing it.
Oops, it didn't come in as a link though. Hold on. Thank you, Angelia. Yeah. Oh, wait.
It's to hosts and panelists. Let me copy it. Oops, I'm sorry. Angelia, would you mind sending that chat to everyone? It's going to hosts and panelists right now. There we go.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got 9 responses. Actually, I guess we could give it one more minute in case you were waiting for that link in the chat. Okay. So I'm seeing a lot of support for increasing housing options in Renton. So on the very important side.
We have some people that Matt, I see you can't access the link. If you can't access the link, but you want to give answers, I think it's fine if you want to just put A, B, C, D, E, or F in the chat, and we can try to track it that way. If you continue not to be able to get access.
And Matt, I just chatted it to you. If you want to copy and paste that in your browser, you could try that. I don't know if the direct chat will help. Oops, never mind. That didn't actually work. Okay.
All right, we got the 10th first.
Okay, we got another one.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, we will move on. Thanks for bearing with us with all the technical getting into the poll.
So how important is providing private open space? And what we mean by private open space is porches, stoops, private yards, and roof decks.
Okay, if the final three want to go ahead and tap in a response. We'll give it a couple more seconds. Okay. So this one's a more split response, interestingly, on providing private open space. Okay, we'll move on.
And then how important is providing open space shared amongst neighbors on the same property? So some of the examples that we were showcasing, you know, kind of like the cottage housing or a courtyard apartment, some of those had examples of what it might look like to have open space that's shared amongst the neighbors. Okay.
Okay, so important.
Yeah.
And less of a split on this one than the private open space.
Mm-hmm.
And also there's a question in the chat if the poll will close after the event. Yes, and this poll is only open while we're running this show. And this question was, how important is providing off-street parking?
Yeah.
I'm noticing that some people are typing in their responses. Thank you for doing that to the hosts and panelists. If you could provide one word or something that lets us know which question you're responding to, that'll help us line it up with the timing later on.
For the next upcoming ones, the ones
You
before.
don't have to go back and.
Yeah, we'll just
Right.
assume that it was for each of the previous questions before that.
Okay, so a little bit of a split here, but mostly on the side of providing off-street parking is important in Renton.
Yeah. So how important is the sense of privacy in your rear yards? And this is showing up pretty clearly as important. Everything. And yeah, it's as shown in some of the examples above, there'll be potentially some backyard development, essentially. So.
Okay, we'll move on here.
So how important is it for the building's entrance to face the street? And so we have some images where that top picture is an example where the door and all of the door and the windows are all kind of facing the building's street, or is facing the street. And then you have example down below where you have garages facing the street, and you have maybe that middle one that has a door, but the doors, some doors are kind of on the side. You have to walk like some paths to get to the back of the area, or whatever the case is. So just interested in your thoughts on that. And we got our
Interesting.
7 or 8. So yeah, it looks like more split on this one.
Yeah, interesting. We'll move on.
How important is the ability to age in place? And so this is trying to get at the different demographics or populations that maybe middle housing might be serving over the next 20 years, or different types of housing are going to be serving over the next 20 years. And age in place can mean both aging, in the home that you have been in for a long time, but also it can mean age in place in terms of getting to age in the neighborhood and community that you've lived for a long time as well, or that your family members are in. So.
Okay. So this one's very important. Got 7 responses again.
Mm-hmm.
And important.
Important is housing that allows for multi-general or extended family living. So you mentioned before, ADUs are kind of, grandma's suite in the backyard or things of that nature. But also with some of these middle housing types with multiple units, you can potentially have, core family live in one unit, and then uncle and aunt or grandma live in another unit, and you can still have, some level of privacy between the family, but your family lives really close. So. You got our 7
Okay.
or 8.
So pretty important here.
Yeah.
Multi-generational and extended family types of configurations.
And how important are family size units? And so a definition of family size units to be thinking about is usually at least a 2-bedroom unit that is, between at minimum 750, 800 square feet, and can also be bigger, obviously, depending on what you think is individually suitable for family.
Okay, so a little split with some neutrals and unimportant, but also several on the very important.
Okay, and then just a scenario. So imagine you're looking to downsize for whatever reason. You're looking to downsize, whether it's maybe rent a place or to buy your first place. What is your ideal home size? Okay, got our 8. So a lot in the 1,000 to 1,500 square feet range. And here we're going to be doing some, you're going to be able to type in your answer here. So what are you most worried about with Renton meeting HB1110 requirements? So maybe it's something that you've been reading or hearing about, something that you heard during this presentation, but if there's anything that worries you or is most worrying about what Renton has to do to meet HB 1110 requirements, please list. And then you can also upvote or like other people's responses if it's kind of like you're co-signing, like, so you don't have to type in the same thing. You can do those type of things as well.
Marcus may have already said this, but you can also submit more than one response here. And thank you for putting up with the technical issues. I know it can be hard, especially if you're on your phone trying to type these responses in.
Mm-hmm.
We have 2 upvotes on this top one showing on parking.
Yeah, we have another comment on parking as well, just a lack of. So I think we have kind of 3 related to parking.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll wrap this up in a minute. We're seeing the parking concerns and also the sense of loss and design, and also a sense of community that comes with the current configuration and the way things are laid out now, or the potential for loss of it. And similarly, design and privacy, parking concerns with the change from 1 unit being on a lot to multiple units. And infrastructure, to water and sewer, also power and internet. So again, making sure that's planned for. And a concern about a disproportionate share in Renton. And again, this is a statewide bill, so it applies everywhere to different degrees in the different tiers, though. And yes, again, about changes between more units on a lot and where there have traditionally been a single unit. And a concern about, again, about design. So lots about parking, design, and some about infrastructure. And the sense of community. Yeah. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one.
Yes. So on the opposite side of that, or what would you most like to see come out of this code update? So what are things that you're looking forward to, or things that you would like to see the city of Renton do that keeps in compliance with some of the stuff we talked about with HB 1110, it's state legislation. So they have to comply, or else there will be a state model code that comes in and supersedes the city's code. And so there are things that the city has the ability to do. There are things that the city has to do to be compliant, but there are also things that the city can do to make it work for the city of Renton, and make it unique for the city of Renton as well. So. Okay, yeah. So housing options and availability of new. an interesting one around kind of illegal duplexes and kind of, I don't know if that's related to maybe safety concerns or, but yeah. Hmm. Right now seeing affordability kind of rise to the top.
And similarly, this one, the affordability and diversity and supply.
Mm-hmm.
Listening to community members and fully understanding concerns and addressing them. Being fair, applying the code the same to everybody, to all developers. And maybe some natural change that occurs over time with existing somehow illegal duplexes. Not sure what's making them illegal at the moment, but. And concerns about meeting building code. So this one about the best and safe options.
Yeah, okay.
One thing is that now that more units would be outright allowed, sort of what may have been happening informally in the past
Yeah.
might happen legally and properly going forward so that structures are safe and meet building code. Okay, I think we can wrap that up.
Yeah. That's the last question.
Yeah, and we just have a couple next steps from the city and then we can open it up for more conversation. Katie, did you want to go over the upcoming timeline?
Yes, thank you, Rachel. I'm sorry, my screen froze momentarily. But I think we're all good now. So what was I going to mention on where we're at and what we've done so far? We kicked things off in March of 2024 of this year, where we launched our webpage and made our public announcement that this work was already underway, or at least the early planning process. And we drafted our public participation plan and briefed our planning commission to get their feedback on this work. And then today was our public engagement workshop. This is one of two, and we'll continue to promote these efforts at public events. We'll actually be at the farmers market this Tuesday at the opening day to talk to folks. If you want to come and talk to us, we'll have a table set up there, and we'll be at the farmers market several dates throughout the summer. So please come down and talk to us. We have not set a date yet for the public engagement workshop number 2. But what we will be doing is, after today's event, summarizing the results and some of the feedback that we've received from you all and at other events. And then we'll get started on drafting the middle housing regulations, and we'll probably come back for that public engagement workshop number 2 to propose and share what we've drafted when we have that information available, and you'll have a chance to review it. And then we have to submit the draft ordinance to the Department of Commerce so that they can get their stamp on it for approval. And then we have to have our ordinance adopted by June 30th, 2025. And I think we're ready to go into questions if anyone has questions. So for folks who are participating on a computer or a tablet, go ahead, you can use the raise your hand feature in Zoom, and then we'll call on you. And also please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. And if you are logged in over the phone, and I think several people, or at least I saw one person logged in that way, use *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute or unmute. And we'll leave this slide up here if in case you need those instructions repeated.
All right, I see first hand raised from Joshua Solarzan. I'm sorry if I pronounced it wrong. But yeah, I'm going to allow you to talk now. Let's go ahead. You're good to go.
Hi, I'm Josh Solorsino. I'm with the Renton Reporter, the newspaper for Renton. And I'm just wondering if someone could explain in simple terms what HB1110 is and how it's going to be applied to Renton. What does that mean for Renton?
So HB 1110 is a state bill that was passed in 2023, and what it requires is for differing city levels. So for the city of Renton, what it will require is all residential areas that currently allow, typically a single family detached home will now have to be required to allow at least 4 units on a lot, per lot, throughout all of the residential areas of the city. So that's the baseline kind of understanding of that. The second half of what needs to be met by the city is they do need to allow 6 of 9 middle housing types defined in the bill, which is what we were talking about with some of those building types. So it's 4 units per lot, but you also then have to allow 6 middle housing types. So you can't just do 4 units per lot, but it's like, I'm only allowing single family detached homes and on like 4 single family detached homes to be on a lot. It has to allow the flexibility for somebody that wants to develop, whether it's a professional, kind of a more professional developer or somebody that owns their home that wants to maybe do something in their backyard. It gives them the flexibility to choose a variety of different things that they want, housing that they would like to develop on the lot. So that's the baseline. There's some specialties around transit proximity that we talked about as well, and then affordability bonuses as well in terms of getting to that 6 units per lot. But for the most basic line understanding is residential areas in the city of Renton will now need to allow 4 units on every single lot rather than the 1 unit and maybe the 1 unit and the 1 ADU that was currently allowed on their lots as of right now.
Makes sense. I have one more question about affordability. What does affordability mean in this context? What is defined as affordability? Is that low income voucher, stuff like that? What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when we're talking about affordability for the purposes of getting those 2 extra units on any lot, and that's talking about like an income restricted, deed restricted income affordable unit. So that's generally a subsidized unit, something that maybe like Habitat for Humanity might build or other affordable housing providers might do. And what that is saying is if it's a home ownership option, it needs to be at 80% AMI. So that is 80% of market value is the affordability level that it needs to be sold at. If it's going to be rental units, then it needs to be rentable for people that make 60% of the area median income or 60% of the market rate value for that unit. If that answers, so that's one form of how we've been talking about affordability. Then there's just the more attainable, more affordable ability. So more affordable units that these housing units are on the market. So that's in comparison. So let's say I live in Seattle. So for an example, you might see a house in Seattle, a single family home in Seattle that's selling for 1.4 million or something like that. If you were to split that into 4 units, it might sell for each unit selling for, I don't know, 800,000. That's still really expensive, but the 800,000 units are more affordable than the 1.4, and you're selling it for 4 separate households instead of just one household on that lot. So that's kind of the 2 levels of affordability that you might be hearing within how we're talking about it.
All right, that makes sense. Thank you. So essentially what this does is that it allows developers to be able to make more of these middle housing ADU type of units. Before, when they were restricted, now it allows more of that to happen.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm seeing a question earlier in the chat about parking, and I'll just read it. For a single unit residential or house where the middle housing applies, am I no longer required to have parking? I have 2 areas where I can park on the property, but does that change? Can I build there where the parking was? And so Matt, I don't know if you want to add any more details, but essentially it does depend on where you are in the city of how much parking the city can require. So it's from 0 to 2, basically, parking stalls per unit. So it depends on where you are. If anyone wants to add on to that.
I was going to add to Rachel, maybe does it also depend on the size of your lot? So if you have a 6,000 square foot lot, we can't require, or 6,000 or below, we can't require any more than 1. And then over 6,000 square feet, we can't require any more than 2. And those are for the residential lots. Of course, you can provide more parking if you want, we just can't require it. And then if you're within the half mile of a frequent transit stop, then we can't require any parking at all. Although someone could provide parking if they wished, we just can't require it.
There are other standards that still apply. So building coverage and impervious surface coverage might limit what you end up doing as well.
I have something to add to that as well. So if you're proposing to keep your property as a single family home, and so you're not going to be building middle housing, these regulations or restrictions apply to middle housing and not to single family development.
Another, and this one's not as much of a question, but a clarification, was, I think I may have misspoke when I read a response during the open-ended responses, but concerns about a disproportionate share, that because land values in Renton may be lower than in places like Bellevue, there may be more opportunities here versus more expensive areas. There is a lot that goes on with development feasibility. And I think the city may be looking at what types of or what proportion of lots might turn over in Renton. And each city is looking at this and trying to figure out what does it really mean for their own city. And one thing that happens in the more expensive places is that they might still get the middle housing, but then the middle housing is also at higher prices to make up for that higher land cost. So wherever there is demand for this kind of housing, it can happen. I welcome other people adding their thoughts onto that as well.
You know, Rachel, there was some questions in there and some comments, I think, about infrastructure. I think that came up in the polling too. Concerns about infrastructure and what the city's doing about that. You know, obviously Renton's an older city. We have older infrastructure. So we are taking a look at that. I think in one of the previous slides, our capital facilities element in our comprehensive plan. We'll be updating that in 10 years, required by HB 1110. But in the meantime, we would be looking at any new development, whether it is middle housing or commercial development. We would look at it the same as far as the infrastructure goes. If the infrastructure can't support whatever is being built, then whoever is building it needs to improve the infrastructure that's there. So if a developer comes in, they want to build new housing and there's an aging sewer or water line in the street that can't support that new development, then they would be required to come in and replace that before they could build. Every new development that comes in, they have to get a water and sewer availability certificate, basically saying, yes, the infrastructure is there to support, or no, it is not, and it needs to be upgraded. And that would be up to whoever is building that new building to do that. So we would be taking a look at it incrementally for now. But I do know, we've talked to our utility folks down in the Public Works Department. They're well aware of HB 1110, what is coming. So we are taking a look at it now, but we will be taking a look at it incrementally with each new development that comes in.
And Matt, there's a follow-up question here about if the way you're looking at infrastructure for water and sewer also applies to traffic as well.
It does, yes. We still look at traffic mitigation fees. All those apply. If there are a certain amount of trips generated by these new developments, we would look at it just like we would any other development.
There's an earlier comment or concern about whether or not middle housing provides more affordable housing. And again, this is what every community is looking at and experiencing, that you have a home on a lot, and then the lot redevelops, and that you see the prices going up from that. And so there are concerns around that it's not actually providing more. There's a concern that it's not actually providing more affordable housing. Marcus, do you want to take a first stab at this one, or anybody from the city?
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on this before, but I think what happens is you have to think about it in the sense of, if you see a new home get redeveloped, there's a potential is either going to be redeveloped as a new single family home, and a new single family home is going to also be more expensive and not attainable. And so then it becomes the question of, is the new single family home or the new fourplex more affordable to me? So that's one way of thinking about it. And then another way of thinking about it is, the area is growing. There are people moving to the Puget Sound region. And so that means there's demand and people looking, bidding and competing with each other. And the more housing that is provided, the less of a bidding war for the new housing, for any housing that's on the market that does become possible, right? And so there's kind of this maybe filtering process that we maybe refer to in housing policy, where new housing comes in, somebody moves into that new housing. Somebody that moves into that new housing doesn't always have to be somebody that is from out of the state or somebody from new to city. It could be somebody that grew up in Renton and now, has had a successful career and is at a new life phase and is now able to afford getting into that new place. And that place that they're leaving is now open and affordable to somebody else at a lower, that's making something else, right? And so it's kind of a domino effect. And so it is a maybe frustrating thing to see new housing come online and see the pricing not seem attainable to you. But it doesn't necessarily mean that for the broader housing system in the city of Renton, that it's not helping to increase affordability as somebody moves into that house. The house that they left before is now available. That house that they left before is probably at a lower price level. So then somebody moves into that one. And then again, it gives, 5 or 6 rotations and cycles through that process. And now everybody's maybe upgraded to a different housing level, but they've done it at a thing about affordable. So
Thanks, Marcus.
yeah.
Okay, there's another question about, will there be targets set about how much middle housing develops akin to PSRC growth targets? And there, in a roundabout way, each city that plans under the Growth Management Act is required to look at the types of developments that will come in, that are likely to come in under each zone in their city, and what affordability band and ownership versus rental will come in. And so in a roundabout way, they are looking at the feasibility or likelihood of middle housing units and what affordability level those would accomplish or provide units for. Katie, you look like you might be able to add something there if you'd like to. You're nodding along.
Nodding along, I think you covered it, Rachel. If you're familiar with House Bill 1220, there's more information wrapped around that, and it's tied to other requirements that the city has to do. But essentially, as Rachel said, we are required to plan for not just build housing, but build housing that is targeted towards meeting the needs of different economic segments. So I think we had a slide on that early on that Marcus covered, and that 17,000 number, that is our housing target. And then from there, we've broken it down by economic segment. what percentage of those 17,000 units should be in those different economic buckets, essentially.
The next question I'm seeing is about where middle housing will be allowed. Are you required? Is there a minimum now that you have to build there? Do you have to do 4 units or do you have to do 6 units? No, you can still do a single family house there. You can do your choice. It's just the upper limit that the city is raising the bar of the upper limit of how many units are allowed on each lot. Okay, I don't think I'm seeing additional questions in the chat. If anybody else is seeing some that haven't
Rachel, I'll just
been addressed, let me know. Yeah, go ahead, Marcus.
while we're waiting or if waiting for an additional question, I'll just add another thing on the affordability thing, just because I talked about it from the market kind of filtering process policy wise. I think I'll also just add that affordable housing providers like Habitat for Humanity and other providers were very significant people in the making of this bill. They are very excited about this bill, and one of the reasons why is because, especially for affordable home ownership, it is very difficult to compete with the general market in terms of development when you don't get when you can't provide extra units. So it's very hard to subsidize a single family home versus 4 units or 6 units potentially type of thing. And so I do think there is a avenue or some hope going forward over the next 20 years that you'll see a lot more subsidized affordable housing, especially subsidized affordable home ownership, pop up throughout the Puget Sound region due to this bill. And that means, building home ownership at 80% of the market value. So cheaper than what you would be able to get on the market.
Thank you, Marcus. Good addition there. I'm not seeing any other hands up or questions in the chat. There are some clarifications about how to get the video and where it will be on
Rachel,
the
it
city's.
looks like Diane Dobson had a question about HOAs. It says this precludes neighborhoods with HOAs, correct? And yes, I believe HB1110 did have a carve out that this would not apply to subdivisions that have HOAs and covenants that would not allow additional units. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that is correct. This I don't know, it's a hard, fast thing of of covenants. It's a weird legal distinction that somehow has created that is hard for the legislation to kind of kick out. So yes, they are. Yeah. So yes, gated communities will stay gated. It's a very big frustration. It was a very big frustration with the bill makers themselves, but it's there's no legal course to. The bill does say that you can't, basically requires that you can't create new HOAs or new covenants that restrict middle housing. So any new gated community cannot restrict middle housing, but the old ones, we can't go back in and say that you can do middle housing in them type of thing.
Thanks, Marcus. I'm seeing a good question here, which actually is stumping me. I live on a private lane with 4 single-family homes. City code allows a max of 4 on a private road. How will this be impacted? And so that's a public works standard. And those are the kinds of code issues that we will be needing to look at as we start actually updating the code. So that is a great question. And thank you for highlighting the question.
Yeah, Paul, I think I'm guessing here that this is probably what we refer to as a shared driveway. And we do have a standard that only allows 4 units to access that driveway. And really, that's a standard that we use when we don't see a need or an opportunity for a public street. And those lanes are fairly narrow. They're meant, really, they're not meant for more than 4 units. So we will be taking a look at that. That'll be part of our discussion as we move forward. So that's a great question.
I am seeing questions about how will specific neighborhoods and South King County be affected by HB 1110. And I will say at the high level, again, this is a broad statewide, it changes across the board, and the higher tiered cities are all required to allow more units. Again, the development economics is really complicated and tricky, and I don't think we can answer exactly what's going to happen in each city in this meeting today.
I just wanted to add just specifically to Maggie's question about how it is expected to impact North Renton. I know that North Renton has many areas of the neighborhood that are zoned residential. So that R8 zoning, which is intended for single family residential. So this HB 1110 legislation would impact those areas in North Renton that are zoned residential. So the slides that you saw here today, that would be the impact.
As well as to all the other neighborhoods in
Correct.
Renton.
Correct. Just wanted to make sure that we were able to specifically answer that question about North Renton.
And someone had asked what Maker's exact role is in Renton. We are a consultant for the city of Renton, helping them update the code and helping facilitate meetings like this. Okay, I see more follow-ups to the conversation. Thank you for engaging actively and giving us more comments. I appreciate those. Have we missed anything? Is anybody seeing anything in the chats that's a question that we've missed? Okay, and no more hands raised.
Nope, I don't see anyone. And time check, it's 11:20. We have 10 minutes more for those who want to speak up. Can always allow you to speak.
And appreciate the comments in the chat too. Those are all part of what we gather as we move forward with implementation and planning for this.
I'm seeing more comments about the lower property values. I do want to say, having worked with a lot of development economists, that sometimes the areas where there is higher demand for more housing and to build housing have higher property values. And so developers do look to those places as well to build. It just means that those units end up being more expensive to pay for the higher land value. So I want to make it clear that middle housing will likely be built, small amounts of middle housing will likely be built in high-priced properties and low-priced properties and everything in between. And the price of the housing itself will change proportionately to the land value. Because there is high demand for more units on higher priced land as well. I see a general question about what is the city's plan?
Well, if it's regarding 1110, we'll be working very hard over the next year, having outreach events, understanding how this is going to affect the city of Renton. We'll be doing a lot of code work. What this bill really does is just it really it's going to really radically change, I would say, just how the code, I'm getting into the weeds here, I'm sorry, but our development regulations will change dramatically just to fit this 1110 in. So this is going to be a long process for us. We have a year to implement this. I think some of the slides indicated we have until June of next year, and we intend to meet that target because the penalty for not meeting that target is having to adopt the model ordinance from the state, and we certainly don't want to do that.
There's a question about what is the target? Should I go back to that slide? I'll stop sharing my screen for a second.
If it's in reference to our growth targets, it's 17,000 new housing units and I think 33,000 new jobs over the course of the next 20 years. And those are based on regional projections. Each city that plans under the Growth Management Act, as Rachel said, accepts or takes on a growth target. Here we go.
Thanks, Katie. I think you already shared it, but here's the general look. And then if you want the more specific look as well.
We don't have, Maggie has a question about the target that has to be met by next year. We don't have a specific growth target by next year. That 17,000 that Katie talked about, that's what we have to take on for the next 20 years.
I'm wondering if the question is about when the legislation needs to be adopted or when the code update needs to be adopted, which is June 2025. Is that right?
Right, that's right.
And I think Matt's question about the 8,000 units on Grady, I'm going to assume that that was part of projection for our Rainier Grady Junction TOD sub area, transit oriented development sub area planning process, the planned action ordinance. But there is a new project, Watershed, which is, Matt, how many units?
Oh, that is about, oh geez. I think it's 145 units across the street from City Hall there. Yeah.
All affordable.
Yeah. I believe we've identified that we have the capacity to meet our 17,000 for the next 20 years. But right now we're working on, as part of our comprehensive plan update, identifying how each of the income buckets that we need to meet are met. As Katie mentioned, we have to make sure we have areas for 0 to 30, 30 to 50, 50 to 80%, and then higher than 80%. And those are based on annual median income. So affordability buckets is what we're working on right now as part of the comp plan update. Oh, there's a good question about subdividing land today in anticipation of HB 1110. We get this question a lot. Folks come in, they know a little bit about HB 1110 and wonder if they can maybe go forward and utilize the rules that would be in effect next June. And you can subdivide land today. You can use the rules in effect today, but we have not adopted any of the middle housing legislation yet. So any application that comes in before that June 2025 date would have to comply with the regulations in place right now.
Well, if that's it for questions, I just wanted to let folks know I was asked to make an announcement that this is not the only event happening in Renton today. So there's the recycling event at Renton Technical College, which started at 10 and goes until 2. It looks like they're accepting larger items like mattresses and box springs and tires.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for taking time out today on a Saturday. Really appreciate it. Yeah, Matt Hamby just said, this is a huge challenge. Yes, yes, it is. We recognize that. And we're going to move forward, and we're going to make sure that, we do as much outreach as possible. Please feel free, really, to reach out to us at city staff. If you've got questions or concerns, or want to submit comments, we want to hear that. So again, appreciate everybody's time today. Go out and enjoy the rest of your weekend before I hear it starts getting soggy tomorrow. So thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Happy
you.
weekend.